When a mechanized artillery shell is locked into a steel breech, the resulting violence is absolute. By 1914, Europe had perfected the industrial production of this violence. This capability emerged during one of the most stable eras in European history. For 43 years, between 1871 and 1914, the continent experienced rapid economic growth and an absence of major European-wide wars. Beneath the diplomatic pleasantries, rapid technological advancement and rigid treaties were constructing a highly sensitive, tightly coupled geopolitical machine designed for total war. For decades, peace had been maintained through a doctrine known as the balance of power. This was a straightforward diplomatic calculus. If any single nation grew too strong, the others would form a coalition to block them, preventing any one empire from dominating the continent. The event that broke that equilibrium occurred in 1871. Following the Franco-Prussian War, a fragmented collection of small, independent German states was unified into a single, centralized German empire. This new empire possessed a massive population and sat directly in the center of Europe. The old balance of power collapsed. The 43 years of peace that followed were merely the incubation period for an inevitable systemic trap. Germany's geographic dominance was immediately accelerated by the Industrial Revolution. With abundant domestic coal and iron ore, the new empire rapidly modernized its infrastructure and workforce. This table tracking the industrial growth of Germany reveals the scale of the shift. In 1871, German steel production was under 2 million tons. By 1913, it hit roughly 19 million tons, allowing Germany to surpass Britain as the leading industrial economy in Europe. This economic explosion required a constant feed of raw materials and new markets. Germany entered the race for overseas colonies, thrusting the empire into intense imperial competition with Britain and France over global territory. Militarism transformed the era as governments integrated military supremacy into the core of national policy, public budgets, and social prestige. This breakdown of the naval arms race details the resulting escalation. As Germany sought to challenge Britain's historic command of the seas, both nations poured vast resources into battleship production, leaving Britain with 29 modern dreadnoughts and Germany with 17 by 1914. Looking at this chart of standing armies in 1914, the militarization of land forces was equally severe. Enabled by industrial-age logistics, Russia maintained an active peacetime force of 1.4 million soldiers, while Germany fielded roughly 890,000. Seeking security against these massive forces, the major powers locked themselves into rigid treaty networks, the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, facing the Triple Entente of France, Russia, and Britain. These alliances were intended as a deterrent, but they contained a fatal design flaw. By linking the security of multiple states into opposing monolithic blocks, they ensured that any localized border dispute would automatically trigger a chain reaction, dragging the entire continent into an industrial war. The geopolitical machine was built in the capitals of Western Europe, but its most volatile fault line lay in the southeast, the Balkan Peninsula. Throughout the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had been losing territory in the region, creating a political vacuum. Aggressive, newly independent states like Serbia sought to expand, clashing directly with the Austro-Hungarian Empire's desire to control the territory. Austria-Hungary viewed Serbian ambition as an existential threat. The multi-ethnic empire's leaders feared that successful South Slavic unification would encourage their own populations to rebel and tear the empire apart. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was actually a moderate. He favored administrative reforms that would have granted greater autonomy to ethnic groups within the empire. This made him a specific target. Serbian extremists feared that if Franz Ferdinand succeeded, life inside Austria-Hungary would become acceptable for Slavic populations, effectively killing their dream of an independent, unified Yugoslav state. On June 28, 1914, the Archduke visited Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. The timing coincided with a highly sensitive Serbian National Commemorative Day. The assassination resulted from a sequence of failures, culminating when the driver took a wrong turn. The car stopped to reverse, placing it directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old conspirator who fired 2 fatal shots. A chaotic accident on the periphery of a decaying empire activated the machinery of European destruction. What followed is known as the July Crisis. In a span of just 37 days, decades of carefully maintained diplomatic peace completely unraveled. This timeline of the July Crisis outlines the sequence of diplomatic failures. It tracks how a regional dispute rapidly forced the hands of decision-makers across the continent. Before acting against Serbia, Austria-Hungary sought backing from Berlin. On July 5th and 6th, Germany issued the blank check, a promise of unconditional support. German leaders assumed that decisive action would keep the conflict localized and deter Russia from intervening. But Austria-Hungary delayed. They waited nearly a month before issuing a 10-point ultimatum to Serbia. The demands were intentionally severe, drafted specifically to violate Serbian sovereignty and force a rejection. Serbia's response on July 25th accepted almost every demand. Despite this concession, Austria-Hungary declared the response unsatisfactory, broke off diplomatic relations, and declared war on July 28th. The crisis now shifted to Russia. Having historically portrayed itself as the protector of Slavic peoples, Russian leadership feared that abandoning Serbia would permanently destroy their influence in the Balkans. Russian diplomats initially ordered a partial mobilization, targeting only Austria. But military planners quickly realized the Russian railway schedules were so complex and rigid that partial mobilization was mechanically impossible. They had to mobilize the entire army, or none of it at all. The logistical weight of industrial-era warfare systematically eliminated the diplomatic off-ramps needed to prevent a global conflict. In 1914, mobilization served as a declaration of war. Because activating millions of reservists took weeks, no nation could afford to wait and see if diplomacy worked. Once the order was given, the logistical momentum was virtually unstoppable. Millions of men moved according to perfectly synchronized railway timetables. Stopping the trains mid-route would cause catastrophic bottlenecks, leaving a country completely defenseless. Germany faced a massive logistical dilemma, a two-front war against Russia in the east and France in the west. Their solution was the Schlieffen Plan, a strict mathematical timeline requiring them to defeat France in precisely 6 weeks before the Russian army could fully arrive. To meet that strict 6-week deadline, the German army could not afford to fight through the heavily fortified French border. The plan strictly required them to bypass the defenses by invading through neutral Belgium. This logistical necessity sealed Europe's fate. The violation of Belgian neutrality automatically triggered Britain's entry into the war, pulling the final major power into the conflict. Once the railway schedules of mobilization were activated, political leaders lost their agency. The mechanical logistics of the military engine overrode diplomacy entirely. The scale of the rupture was total. Within roughly a month, localized gunfire in Bosnia had activated millions of soldiers across the continent. This flowchart illustrates how these structural causes reinforced one another over decades. German industrial growth drove imperial competition, which required military expansion, which necessitated strict alliances, which amplified the instability in the Balkans. The Sarajevo assassination activated the structural machinery Europe had spent 43 years building. Every government involved made choices that were entirely rational within their own strategic silos, but when combined, the cumulative effect produced an outcome that none of the architects anticipated or controlled. The standing armies, the rapid trains, the ironclad alliances, every safeguard designed to guarantee national security became the exact mechanism that guaranteed mutual destruction. The events of 1914 leave a precise historical warning. When international systems become sufficiently rigid, militarized, and tightly coupled, even a wrong turn by a driver in Sarajevo can shatter a continent.